8 minutes after 7. Thank you for staying with the South African Morning. Now, mediators addressing the Russia-Ukraine situation have to be cognizant of their responsibilities to the parties as well as to the dying women and children. They therefore have to draw from as many resources as they can to ensure a successful outcome. And that's according to Professor Tim Murithi from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. He joins me now to discuss the complexities of South Africa playing a mediating role in the Russian-Ukraine crisis. This after, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa was requested to play a mediating role in the crisis. Professor Tim, thank you so much for your time and good morning to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us about this issue. So what are those complexities that lie ahead for South Africa playing this mediating role?
Thank you, Tumelo, and good morning to you and to your viewers. So if indeed it is the case that President Cyril Ramaphosa might play a mediating role, and this has not been clearly defined by the presidency, so we hopefully will get more information about this, then as you said, the mediator has a very, very important responsibility of enabling the parties to come together and find creative ways in a context of mutual respect. And find creative ways of brainstorming solutions to the issues that they're dealing with or trying to address. Now, the Russian-Ukraine crisis has got so many dimensions to it, and the mediator will therefore need to be, quite well resourced in terms of the insights into mediation, which is what the article that I wrote was actually referring to Tumelo.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose we do have some insight of how this mediating role, again, as you mentioned, if indeed is to take place, we have a bit of insight as to in what direction it might take. You made a good example in your article here, in your opinion piece, around the several talks between the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov of Russia, and Dmytro Kuleba of Ukraine in Antalya in Turkey. In your perspective, how have those talks been? What have they indicated in terms of negotiations at this point?
Well, we've seen that they've been quite challenging. We've had 3 rounds already, and now we're in a 4th round. And the challenge here is that Turkey is the mediator in this particular context, and Turkey is also a member of NATO, and NATO is supplying weapons to the Ukrainians fighting against the Russians, or defending themselves against the Russians, I should say. And so in this context, the mediator is not seen to be impartial, but actually has an interest. And this is why I think now we're entering the 4th round of the Turkish negotiations, and I think they will continue to falter until the mediation framework is in fact altered. And this is where, if President Ramaphosa in fact has this opening, he should look for a way to create an alternative platform or convening forum for this crisis to be resolved with NATO as a party to the conflict, not as a standby, actor.
Yeah. And I mean, they've been talking a lot, that is South Africa, about the importance of mediation, the importance of negotiation. That seems to be the stance of South Africa. But in your definition, what defines a third-party mediator in this instance, and how urgent is one needed in this conflict?
I would say one is needed extremely urgently. We've seen refugee flows upwards of 3 million. We've seen cities, innocent people being bombed and having to flee. And so I would say the brutality of this assault, the Russian assault on Ukraine, means that mediation is extremely urgent. And the primary aspect of being a mediator is to be impartial and neutral to both parties, and therefore receptive by both parties. And also one that can also create, spaces for the parties to explore their interests in creative ways, to brainstorm, and to also be able to come up with solutions that will meet both interests. This is not always easy, and therefore it's quite a long and lengthy and arduous and painstaking process. And this is one thing that any mediator going into such a process should consider. That's the first step. And then there's the traumatization of the millions of women and children, I think, Tumelo, you mentioned, that are dying and being forced to flee. And that dimension means that psychosocial trauma has to be included in any mediation agreement coming out of the negotiation process. And that means putting in place transitional justice processes and mechanisms. And for example, the European Union has a transitional justice framework, and the African Union also has one that President Ramaphosa's team can actually draw from. So there's lots of content and lots of experience in this. In the country, around the continent, and around the world that he can draw on if this is in fact the path that he has to take as a journey as a mediator.
Absolutely. And we do know that President Ramaphosa has extensive experience as a negotiator. The example that you also offered here being that he led negotiations with the former white supremacist apartheid regime of South Africa. But the question is, with that profile, is he the right man for this job?
Look, the right man is the man or woman, so to speak, that the parties believe that can actually get the job done. I think continuing with a path where one of the parties does not see the mediator as being neutral is going to lead us nowhere. So you do need a degree of international experience. You certainly need an ability to operate at the level of heads of state, and to have that tradecraft, so to speak, to be able to operate in a geopolitical context. And I would say Ramaphosa has that. His team, also needs to draw still from other resources and people that have an insight into this, so as actually to make this process less challenging. It will be extremely challenging, just given the dimensions of Ukraine, Russia, NATO.
Right.
And so the case is to actually have a mediator that can be able to draw from all these resources to achieve a outcome that will stop the war and help people to get back to their normal lives in Ukraine.
Well, Prof, I appreciate this rich conversation and sharing your perspective on this matter. Professor Tim Murithi from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation talking to us this morning about the role that lies ahead, of course, for South Africa, if indeed the president, that's Cyril Ramaphosa, is expected to be the mediator in this regard. I just want to point at this one particular point that the Prof did mention, that it's not just the role of the mediator, but also from both parties who have the responsibility to be receptive to the mediation process and the framework conditions which are conducive for a positive outcome. So I suppose we'll see whether or not that balancing ground will be found between Russia and Ukraine. All right, this is what we had asked you as well a bit earlier on.